Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, whichever is appropriate. I'm Jennifer Cheng. I'm Professoriate Fellow at the University of Melbourne Law School and Emeritus Professor at La Trobe University. I'm most delighted to welcome you to the first session 2021 CIBEL Global Network Conference hosted by the UNSW Law School's Herbert Smith Freehill CIBEL Center. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the Bendigo people that are the traditional custodians of the land where UNSW stands. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. We are going to have a fairly busy session from 4 speakers, both academics and practitioners. We will start first with Professor Yasuri Shirai from the Faculty of Policy Management, Keele University. She will be speaking on the question of climate change and growing challenges to monetary policy. By way of brief introduction, Professor Shirai is currently a professor at Keele University and is also a senior advisor to EOS at Federated Hermes, located in London. She is also a non-executive board member of a Japanese listed food company. She holds a PhD in economics from Columbia University. She was also a visiting scholar to Asian Development Bank Institute, serving as a member of the policy board of the Bank of Japan. She taught at Sciences Po in Paris and was an economist at the IMF in the 1990s. She is the author of numerous books and papers on a variety of subjects, including central bank digital currency, monetary policy, global finance, and microeconomics, among others. She frequently comments on Japan's economic and global economy at the CNBC TV, Bloomberg TV, China's CCTV English program, and other Japanese TV and radio program. Her most recent book in English is Growing Central Bank Challenges in the World and Japan, published by the Asian Development Bank Institute in June last year. I now welcome Professor Yasuri Shirai to present her paper. Thanks.
Yes, I'm Sayuri Shirai from Tokyo, and I'd like to express gratitude to UNSW and CIBEL and Dr. Wang for kindly inviting me and giving me opportunity to talk about this growing important issue, which is climate change and monetary policy. Next page, please. So just take a quick overview about central bank challenges. In the past, many central banks started to target the inflation targeting, and the time span of this monetary policy was about 3 to 4 years ahead. But because many central banks faced a zero lower bound, especially after Lehman shock, many central banks started to do unconventional monetary easing under effective lower bound. So central bank like Bank of Japan or ECB or Fed tries to do quantitative easing, forward guidance, yield curve control, negative interest rate, and recently average inflation targeting adopted by Fed. And most of these central banks adopt 2% inflation target. In the meanwhile, over this couple of years, there is a growing challenge faced by central bank. This is a climate change. Now, on this issue, the central bank have to look at like a very long-term long time span, like 30 years ahead, like 2050. And here, how the climate change influence central banking circle. One is through the impact on financial stability of financial system. And another one is this climate change influence both real and potential GDP, neutral rate, and prices and inflation. Next page, please. So how the central bank try to approach to this climate risk? There are four approaches. The first one is try to cope with this financial stability. Here, many central banks now started to adapt this disclosure system, TCFD recommendation for financial institutions and corporate sectors. And this is a way to disclose the impact of climate change to financial performance. And also, many central bank and financial regulators started to conduct stress tests of the financial system. The second approach, which is one of the most important issue, is the asset purchase. When we look at the central bank has two types of asset. One is a non-monetary asset, such as foreign reserves, pension fund of central bank's employees, and sovereign wealth fund, often managed by central bank. The other type of asset is a monetary asset, and most of those assets were purchased under quantitative easing. The third approach is the central bank extend the lending to the commercial bank, but central bank can extend credit to the commercial bank, which engage actively in financing green projects. So this is a lending approach. And finally, central bank has a traditional macroeconomic modeling. Now the issue is how to incorporate this long-term climate risk into this model forecasting and the impact on the monetary policy. That is a very, very challenging issue. Next page, please. When we look at the various central banks' practices, two central banks take the lead. One is ECB, and another one is Bank of England. Now, ECB, this year, they just started to do the climate stress test and incorporating 4 million companies and 2,000 banks. And the most interesting issue is ECB already applies the common sustainability criteria to the euro-denominated non-monetary policy portfolio owned by ECB and National Central Bank. The one very important issue under discussion is whether the central bank should apply sort of biases related to the green and sustainability on their purchases of various financial assets. Central bank tends to emphasize market neutrality is important, meaning that when the central bank purchases and conduct QE, they should try to purchase like various bond, according to the size of market. Now, just yesterday, the ECB announced a new strategy over monetary policy, and they just said they're going to introduce this green and sustainability issue to their monetary policy framework. So let's see how they are going to change their framework in the near future. The Bank of England is also taking the lead. They are also doing stress tests over banking and insurance system sectors this year, and they already adapted sustainability criteria to their corporate bond purchases. So they kind of abandoned the market neutrality and try to put more emphasis on the company who make effort to reduce carbons. Okay, please, next page. So I just like to propose two issues which are heavily discussed by central bank. One issue is, so how important this market neutrality is. Why central bank so stick to the market neutrality? And that one issue is these people who still say the market neutrality should not be abandoned. So no argument is that because they are trying to do market neutrality to mitigate market distortion. central banks should not favor particular companies. And the central bank, it's not the central bank job to cope with climate change risk. However, there's a growing view which said maybe market neutrality is not so important. Why? Because quantitative easing itself is already generating market distortion. And if we stick to the market distortion, it means central bank also favor emission-intensive company. So by doing that, the central bank delay the timings to achieve net zero emission target. So, and the central bank should play a role in promoting sustainable financial market. Next page. The final, another issue which I'd like to mention is whether central bank should change their mandate. That is a very contentious issue. Now, Bank of England, they didn't adjust their Central Bank Act. What they did is that every year, the Minister of Finance give remit, sort of instruction to the Bank of England. And in that remit, they clarify that the central bank, while maintaining 2% inflation target, but should also help the government, which have this, which committed to the net zero emission by 2050. So this is the way they introduce these biases to the greening, greening the corporate bond purchases. Riksbank, the Sweden central bank, also try to apply a sustainability issue to their foreign reserve and also their corporate bond purchases and the quantitative easing, but they are doing it without changing their mandate. So at this moment, no central bank hasn't really adjusted mandate, and they try to do it within this mandate. But whether such kind of moderate changes is sufficient to cope with very challenging climate issue is wait to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you for such a wonderful keeping of time. It's great. We won't start Q&A until all papers have been presented. So we now move to the second presenter, Mr. John Vallesario, who is Managing Director in Accenture Technology Consulting Workforce based in London. John is Accenture's Global Blockchain and Multi-Party Systems Lead, responsible for digital assets, custody, and central bank digital currencies. John is currently leading several blockchain engagements with top-tier global organizations and central bank. His topic is financial ecosystem 2 and the role of CBDCs. I now give you Mr. John Vallesario. John.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. It's great being here today with the team. If you go to the next slide, just a quick introduction. We have been working in this area for a number of years and wanting to share sort of some of the experiences in a very brief manner on this presentation. If you flip to the next slide, please. We have been, a lot of what we talk about today is material that you can also download yourself. If you go onto any of the links that you see here, you can download the material from the Revolution of Money papers and the Digital Dollar Project, as well as many of the reports that we published together with a number of central banks on the work that we've done globally. Our work is sort of comprised into two major areas. One is thought leadership and POCs that are answering specific exam questions in a very specific manner, looking at key topics such as liquidity savings or settlement in wholesale markets and so on, through to other sort of more broader topics such as anonymity and privacy. So this is what you see in front of you is sort of much of what we've done in the broader space. Is more, more from a conceptual perspective. In addition to that, we have also been driving a number of key projects around the world, including the Riksbank and the e-Krona project, the Banque de France, and Project Jura, as well as the work that we're now currently doing with SARB and so on. So there's a lot of implementation-oriented, more project-oriented work where we are actually driving a lot of that work. So go to the next slide, please. In addition to that, we've also been working on a number of consultations. I encourage you also to look at what the central banks have been doing and sort of reaching out to the market. So as you can see, there's a lot of development in this area. Things are moving very quickly, and a lot of the major central banks around the world are driving sort of the story around central bank digital currencies as well, and they're reaching out to the market and so on. So go to the next slide. If you build the slide, yes, thank you. So a lot of work is happening in this area. The central bank focus is intensifying. There's a lot of experimentation and research. Every other week, we see sort of a report being published on this, and so on. So a lot of work is happening across the globe with various central banks. In addition to that, the vendor ecosystem that is implementing such solutions is also developing rather quickly, and focusing more on functional areas such as performance and security and resilience and so on, which is actually very encouraging. In addition to that, I would say that we also seeing sort of some optimal configurations emerging based on some key requirements. And so the most advanced projects are ones that come to us with very precise requirements of what they're trying to achieve from a functional perspective. And looking at the market and developing such solutions, we see a number of optimal configurations emerging that balances key stakeholders and alignment, which is very important and non-trivial as well. Go to the next slide. We also see a couple of things that are driving CBDCs. One is sort of the whole push and drive towards token asset exchanges in addition to digital asset issuance. This topic is very important because commercial banks and other exchanges and FMIs are actually implementing the issuance of digital assets. And to accompany this, we also see a number of key sort of needs for CBDC from a settlement perspective. And so as a result, we see this being one of the drivers of the whole wider CBDC sort of campaigns that we see. Also, we see a convergence of what's happening around in this area. So not only is, I guess, the tokenized cash aspect of it, where central banks, stable coins, and other sort of initiatives that are out there driving sort of the market demand for it, but also all of this coming together and converging and so on. So go to the next slide. We see sort of the evolution of digital assets, and we talk about a global token economy as sort of what we sort of see developing. So we talk about digital assets and sort of the banks that are issuing them and central bank digital currencies and so on, and what we're currently sort of seeing in the market. We see sort of a global token economy emerging, and where you have both assets and cash tokens, and ideally sort of CBDC sort of being as part of the global token economy. And that will transform financial services, and we believe that we are beginning to see many signs of that as we speak today. If you go to the next slide. I'll focus a little bit on the wholesale and the capital markets area. And the reason why we put this slide together is just to show sort of a very broad cross-section of capital markets, buy side, sell side, regulators, CCP, CSDs, and exchanges, and so on, all sort of engaging in this area, both from a digital asset perspective, but also from a CBDC perspective. So what that means is that we see projects, case studies that, as you can see below, mentioned, you know, in the boxes that you see in the diagram. Many of those are things that we've been involved in, and others that are sort of just leading market initiatives. But we see sort of the CBDC being a key topic because this is sort of as an efficient means of settlement with zero risk, supported by central banks, and being sort of ultimately the liability of central bank, and using that as a means of settlement as opposed to having other counterparties in the middle of it, which introduces risk and also cost and friction as well. So we see sort of CBDCs playing a key role in enabling capital markets of the future, and we see a lot of what the different projects, as you can see in front of you, sort of enabling that going forward. Go to the next slide. We also have a number of alternatives to CBDC, and in the absence of CBDC implementations, we see a number of stablecoin initiatives, the bank coins, consortium coins, and others that have been sort of stepping into the space to fill this need. But we believe that CBDCs are going to be are necessary, number one, but also that are going to fill this void of risk-free and also high-grade central bank money in order to enable these kind of transactions to take place. And so as a result, these are alternatives. They're being looked at in various guises. But at the same time, from a systemic and also from a FMI perspective, we believe that CBDCs are really the way to go, and we see this as a sort of an implementations that are being rolled out in front of us. Go to the next slide. Central bank money remains in national currency terms the safest form of money, and this is why also from an international standards and for FMIs, they should offer this as a means of settlement. So this is a different format of money and enables those kind of markets that we talked about before to actually be realized. And so as a result, we believe that this is a necessary component for the future of financial markets. So go to the next slide. We see three sort of key application areas: retail, wholesale, and cross-border. Some projects, for instance, like in Sweden, the retail projects for the retail CBDC in Sweden, and the e-krona project is focused primarily on retail markets and consumers. Wholesale projects such as the stuff that we're doing, or the projects that we're involved in with Project Jura and Banque de France, is primarily focused on securities trading, issuance and trading, and settlement as well, in addition to cross-border. But all of these sort of converge together because we see a lot of applications of retail and cross-border, wholesale and cross-border, and so on. So there's an interesting overlap in this Venn diagram, that if you ultimately develop a general purpose CBDC token, you can use it for a variety of different applications. Projects are starting either from one dimension or the other, and usually encompassing more than one area of scope here. But as you can see, there's a lot of applications for a broader general purpose CBDC token. Go to the next slide. There's four key themes that we sort of see why developing sort of CBDCs. One is diversification, and I'll hover on this one a little bit more, but simply because we see most of the CBDC projects, especially the ones in the retail space, developing because of a need for a resilience, diversification, and also access and autonomy, and more of a strategic theme than anything else. So this is actually a very interesting one because it creates almost a parallel payment rail and a need for or sort of an ability to be autonomous from existing sort of payment schemes today. From a central bank issuance point of view, this creates sort of that level of independence and sovereignty that is ultimately in sort of the remit of a central bank. In addition to that, we also see settlement as one of the digital currency themes, enabling sort of that end-to-end settlement for financial markets, and that's more obviously in the wholesale space. But at the same time, it sort of enables that wider digital asset, virtual asset sort of ecosystem. And from a settlement perspective, it creates sort of that end-to-end capability that is necessary. Functionality. One of the things that we've also been looking at is more broadly, how can you use a CBDC in an extra jurisdictional capacity? So issuing a digital currency by a central bank in one jurisdiction and using it to settle transactions in another jurisdiction. Actually, that is something quite innovative. It's not been done before. And it's also a very interesting sort of dimension of how we can apply this new format of money in those areas. And finally, coexistence, so to being able to bring all of that together into an optimum currency area. Go to the next slide, please. So we see quite a lot of activity with regards to wholesale and retail. Many projects are initially focused on wholesale. They've pivoted into retail, and then there's a lot of development also back into the wholesale space. And cross-border creates a lot of new opportunities. There's a lot of discussions and debate about token versus account. Needless to say, we believe that the token has the properties of a digital bearer instrument and where the real innovation is. And then the ability for a central bank to then allow it to exist outside, but in full control of the central bank, I think is really where the innovation lies. We also see sort of the preservation of a two-tier model, using sort of commercial banks to be able to distribute sort of CBDCs into the market, and also allowing commercial banks to transact with one another themselves, and preserving sort of that customer and consumer relationships that are there today, as to not disrupt sort of those markets, and also mirroring the cash and distribution cycle to the marketplace. And finally, I want to leave you with a last thought around sort of where are these features, providing wide accessibility to customers, enabling peer-to-peer payments, enabling offline, which is also a key feature for some of the retail propositions, and enabling finally a sovereign national payment rail. And on that note, I will end the presentation, and hopefully if you have any questions, we'll take them as well. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's great. Our next presenter is Professor Korean Javed Gurnesh from the University of Baisa. Professor Javed Gurnesh is a professor of private law and economic law. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And the University of Baisa, and a professor of law at Ados University of Applied Sciences. I'm hearing echo in my machine, so I'm not going to do too much of the introduction, but basically to say that she is both academic and also heavily involved in policy making at national and international level. Her topic is the right and duty of central banks to issue retail CBDC. Corinne?
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Thank you for having me. What I want to do in my 12 minutes, more or less, next slide, please, is the following. I will briefly review selected motivations for retail CBDC issuance. This will be followed by an explanation why such issuance must be legitimized by central bank mandate. And to answer the question whether there exists actually such a legal basis, I'll trace the evolution of monetary mandates in general, and I'll try to show the connection with the supply of money to the public. And I hope that this will make the purpose of the central bank mandate more comprehensible and show why the issuance of money for the public is an indispensable right and a duty to central bank, and what does this mean under existing mandates for the issuance of retail CBDC. Next slide, please. So two motives stand out clearly. Retail CBDC is intended to strengthen the state's own money. This seems increasingly urgent since there is a shift away from tangible domestic state money, that is cash, toward digital domestic private money, especially bank deposits, but also e-money and more recent competitors. This is growing faster than ever before. And besides, retail CBDC is also intended to strengthen the domestic currency now in the sense of the monetary unit, because on one hand, it opens up new possibilities for a global role of a state's own currency, so for example, for the US dollar, etc. And on the other hand, there is also fear of a potential migration out of the own currency analogous to the dollarization. Next slide, please. Now, with regard to the legitimacy, the issuance of money, whether tangible or not, is part of state sovereignty, and based thereupon, the state can not only define the mandates in the field of monetary affairs, but it can also delegate them to either state or private bodies. So whenever a central bank wants to issue retail CBDC, the principle of attribution of powers requires that this activity actually falls under a mandate that has been assigned to a central bank. Next slide, please. We now look at how these monetary mandates have developed as such and what the role of the supply of money to the public played during this process. The state has always been quick to assert its sovereign claim on the issuance of money, initially because it proved to be a great resource of fiscal resource. And in the case of commodity money, it took the form of seigniorage, obtained by overvaluation, and later, at the time of fiat money, it was the overissuance and the associated inflation that relieved, of course, the burden of the indebted government budget and thus took the place of seigniorage profit. However, the more an efficient tax system developed, the less the state had to resort to financing via the money press. And at the same time, the consensus grew that a stable monetary system and especially stable prices and smooth payments were essential for a prospering economy, were essential for the creation of value, and ultimately were essential for the generation of future tax substrate. So this shifted the reason for issuing money to the public, shifted this away from being a monopoly in the interest of the sovereign, more to the issuance of money in the sense of a public good. This was supplemented by fulfillment of an additional public service obligation, the notorious maintenance of stable prices through monetary policy. However, the latter is achieved today no longer via the cash supply to the public. So this was only used at times of, so to speak, inflationary monetary policy. Nowadays, it is implemented by supplying selected wholesale agents with the central bank reserves. Therefore, cash instead now serves exclusively to other objectives. On the one hand, it is a part of payment policy mandate in that it promotes smooth payment. And on the other hand, it's also part of the stability policy mandate in that it serves as a quality anchor for privately issued money. I'm going to explain this in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So this was the moment where these monetary mandates had to be given into the hands of an independent body, so typically central banks, and this became, though, central bank mandates. Now, please note that this slide here is a very stylized overview. For example, not all central banks today have an explicit stability mandate. In contrary, it is heavily disputed, for example, for the ECB, whether such a stability mandate exists and how far it reaches, etc. Often it still is understood as a part of the liquidity supply obligation from which, in fact, it has evolved through the lender of last resort function. Now, what is most interesting here is the column on the far right on the implementation of the mandates at the retail level. Again, as you can see, the central bank does not implement today monetary policy via direct operations with the public. This is so for good reason, since this would contradict the proven two-tiered monetary system in which the market, and more specifically the competing financial intermediaries, primarily have to determine the conditions of money supply. Now, as a result, as I've just said, cash has only but still a dual function in that it serves as optimal money. That's a term I'm going to describe on the next slide. So as optimal money, it is used to pay and save, and it is also used as a quality anchor towards private money. But it is not used and must not be used as a tool for monetary policy implementation. Now, what exactly do I mean by optimal money? My co-authors, Benjamin Gewa and Seraina Grünewald, and I, in a recent paper, we have detailed what is understood by optimal money. In summary, it has certain properties, some of which are value related and others relate more to the access design. So in combination, they set a minimum qualitative standard to for private monies, and so particularly bank deposits must not fall significantly below the standard if they do not want to risk a migration out of deposits and toward cash. Now, the value of optimal money must be risk neutral and uniform. Risk neutrality means that there has to be the real value equal to the nominal value or to the face value, so to speak. Only then money is suitable for payment and saving and calculation. Central bank money issued comes closest, in fact, to this ideal, since on the one hand it has no insolvency risk, and due to monetary policy it ideally also minimizes inflation and exchange rate risk. Uniformity plays a role where several types of money of the same currency circulate in an area, for example, deposits and cash, which is usually the case here. Central bank money serves as an anchor because private monies are claims due on demand and denominated in state money. So even though they are all issued by different banks, these deposits, and these banks have balance sheets of different quality, they all circulate at par. Of course, a dense network of prudential regulation, supervision, also financial aid if need be, this all has leveling effect as well. However, it would not suffice on its own, because only the convertibility of private money into state money is structured so that banks must expect an increased cash withdrawal if they conduct their business too riskily. Then there are these access-related aspects. I will not go through all of these. Just to mention one, it has also be efficient in use in order to be used as means of payment and store of value. Originally, cash and especially banknotes were efficient in handling. However, in an increasingly digitized society, there is a need for a digital complement to tangible cash, and this is where the role of retail CBDC comes into play. Now, next slide, please. Time does not permit me to walk you through the bullet points here, but it basically shows reasons, they are also detailed in the paper already mentioned, reasons why such optimal money cannot be created by market participants alone. In summary, there is a risk of market failure, at least in the long run, if only private money is issued entirely without a state anchor. So we come to the last slide, please. I'd like to conclude and sum up. Well, as I've tried to show, private money reads a quality anchor, the issuance of which belongs in the hand of an institution that has to be independent of private interests as well as of fiscal desires, so typically a central bank. Now, traditionally, banknotes served as such optimal money and as an anchor. But in the digitized society, they have rapidly lost or are rapidly losing their significance, and for this reason, a digital equivalent is needed to supplement cash. So this is so for payment and stability policy mandate aspects under existing mandates of today. Accordingly, central banks that are tasked with a payment policy mandate, so most of them, already have a right and have a duty to issue retail CBDC. This is based on the purpose of the mandate. So it does not play a role with regard to the exact wording. It does not matter whether it is mentioned in the monetary law or in the central bank law that there is a possibility to issue tangible cash, for example. It is based on the general purpose why this retail CBDC has to be issued to use as means of payment and as an anchor as well. So with that, I have come to the end, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. And the next speaker is Professor Wang Han. Professor Wang Han is the co-director of the Herbert Smith Freehill China International Business and Economic Law Center at the UNSW Law School. In the most recent research magazine 2020, published by the Australian newspaper, Professor Wang is named as the research field leader in international law. His work focuses on the future of international economic development, although often from Chinese and regional perspective. His present focus is on law and technology, particularly central bank digital currency. He has advised or spoken at events organized by many international organizations and institutions, including APEC, ICC, UNSW, and also at private sectors. He is regularly interviewed by the media globally. Professor Han's topic is China's approach to the digital bank currency. Professor Wang. Wang Han.
Thank you, Jianfu, for the kind introduction, and also it's been great to speak at our. I think it's been the third event of our CIBEL Center on digital currency, central bank digital currency this year, and also it's great that we look into the central bank digital currency since we held the first workshop on that back in 2018. It's probably one of the world's first one on central bank digital currency and legal issues back in 2018. And now I would like to talk about China's pathway to central bank digital currency. If I can move on to the next slide, that we see that it's been very important. And I would like to thank the previous speakers, John and others, for the excellent presentation, which laid a very clear and Corinne also mentioned about the central bank digital currency. And we understand that it is a digital fiat currency, and it's a kind of the game changer in the sense that we're talking about not currency where the users can choose use or not to use. Instead, we are looking at a currency which you need to use, and you are legally obliged to use. For example, that's the case in China, where when you face EC in yuan. And also, I think it's been a game changer because it's involves not only cash, as the feature like in the medium of exchange and so on and so forth. It involves data, the harvest data, including digital identity issues. So they are quite different from traditional money, and it involves technology. Thinking about using cash, you don't really need a lot of energy, technology, but that's the issue for CBDC, and also of course new regulation. So my question here is about what is China's pathway to CBDC and how do we understand that? So now let's move on to the next slide, which I would like to see that China's approach is quite unique. Here I would like to see China's approach to CBDC. I would like to use a functional approach. I mean, which means that I look at China's approach to CBDC is a unique one, but also including China's attitudes towards crypto, cryptocurrencies, private cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins. Because if you look at China recent, central bank law amendment proposal, it also includes, one that China will recognize digital currency CBDC, another side China proposed to prohibit crypto, private crypto currency like Bitcoin. And most recently, you see that the mining and also in China, the cryptocurrency mining in China has been prohibited and has been stronger enforcement in that regard. And also, I would like to claim that China's approach has been a very unique one in the sense of not only that they have a very strong crackdown on the private cryptocurrency, and also that is happening along with China's promotion of state-led central bank digital currency, which is not common in other countries pursuing the CBDC because they usually have parallel CBDC along with private cryptocurrency. And secondly, I would like to argue that China's pathway is a kind of strong role of the government. Here, as you see in the slides here, China using that as kind of unilateral institutional building. It's being called digital currency and electronic payment. So use digital RMB. It's a digital currency, but used a lot in electronic payments, and it's often towards retail CBDC. That's quite different from other countries like Australia, which focus on wholesale one, and it's choose a two-tier structure. First one, central bank issuing, and through to the commercial banks, and second layer, actors like commercial banks, fintech companies, and so on and so forth, redistribute them to retail users. And they have two repositories. Central bank, issuing database, commercial bank has database, but also individual wallets. And there's three centers, data center, perform authentication, registration, but also big data analysis. And here, quite interesting, also important one for governance, they also have controllable anonymity. So which means that, at the end of the day, the government will have access to the data, understand where the money come from and go to, and also they can have a profound implications. And I should also note that China also work hard to promote international use of CBDC. So for example, China working with SWIFT, joint venture reportedly working on that. China is discussing with Singapore about CBDC possible use by Chinese tourists in Singapore. But also there are reports back in 2018 or 19 where China reportedly, according to China Daily, are promoting CBDC standards along some BRI countries. So it's kind of game changer in the regards that, think about if you have network effects, along the BRI, when more and more people using that, CBDC, because China has a pretty strong position in the BRI project, but also along the Beijing Olympic Winter Games in 2022, where China will pilot that. But also think about, the trading with China. China already promoting RMB internationalization for quite a while, including the iron ore transaction with Australian parties where they try to use RMB by the state-owned enterprises in China. So I like to see a scenario where they have network effects, share infrastructure, and also possible standard setting in China's favor, and in which way there can be an international scenario where RMB will be increasingly used internationally, and which can be a game changer, challenging the role of the US dollar, and possibly leading to a parallelism in terms of international payment system and allowing direct transaction between Chinese party and other party without the need to go through intermediary currency like US dollar. So that's the point I would like to make here. And let's move on to the next slide. We're talking about China's pathway. It's a kind of unique one, where we see those kind of governments one strong government role, Beijing consensus, and also unique in terms of the attitude towards private cryptocurrencies. And then I would like to argue that how do we understand that in the past, I think in the WTO, World Trade Organization, China is downloading in external rules, financial rules, and adapt them to Chinese practice. But I think nowadays we see China's kind of selective reshaping or even shaping the currency and international monetary order, because China's a trading power but not a monetary power. So, and here China wants to solve this bottleneck. And here you see that in the past, Professor Pittman Porter argues being selective adaptation. What I argue here, China in the CBDC and the BRI in the broader sense, a kind of selective reshaping. Instead of downloading, China is trying to upload incrementally Chinese standards and China style practice. And what are the influencing factors? I think there are several ones, which are quite different from previous selective adaptation in the WTO era. One is the perception and conception. What does it mean? It means that how China perceive and conceive international rules or institutions or practices. One example is that China use a lot of China's advantage in the fintech sector, e-commerce, AI, and for example, China try to conceive how blockchain. I noticed there are questions in the Q&A session. The blockchain can be used not totally in all aspects of CBDC, but in some verification and other aspects that are open to different platform or technology. And secondly, they also involve conception, because this is pretty unique for China. China is about to be the first major economy issue CBDC, and you have to set the standards as a first mover. That range from data connection to technical standards and regulation. So they're quite different, their observation that from other countries using the CBDC, exploring the CBDC, if you compare with sand dollar, for example. And let's move on. We're talking about, let's move on to the next slide. Besides the perception and conception, we see that's also another factor is complementarity. What does it mean? In the past, we see that complementarity means how China's local priority work with, for example, WTO rules. But here in this selective reshaping, I think they are all between China's preferences vis-a-vis new rules and practice or standards institutions like the CBDC. What are the China's preferences? As mentioned earlier, a stronger role in international governance. China want to be a strong role in that regard, but also in terms of trade, finance, and response to external dynamics. like Libra, we challenge China's control of capital, and may lead to capital flight, and also to strengthen the role of the government, because in China domestic context, there's a lot of the dominance by the private entities like high fintech companies. And this relates to a third factor, legitimacy, that about domestic legitimacy. Chinese want to regain the control of the central bank, and also, but more importantly, is about international legitimacy. So they're arguing that China, argue that the US dollar has been dominant, and they may have the issue where abuse of dominant position as the international currency. So it's time to think about RMB internationalization to provide a different currency to be used, drive down the cost, and so on and so forth. And of course, they also have institutional capacity issue involving hardware and software. So let's move on to the final slides of mine. We'll also show you some of the recent papers of mine, and also join also the one. To conclude, I would like to see that we are seeing a kind of the moving target. China is learning by doing of CBDC and including whether and how to use smart contract. And China will get the first mover advantage. But the issue is also about whether and how the first mover advantage can be sustained, because the second mover may also benefit from the lessons of the first mover. Second, there are intended and unintended effects, which means that you have intended effects, in sense of China developing a strong currency. China wants RMB to be internationally used, but they may also have unintended effects. For example, whether they have markets fluctuation, verification, and also whether they have issue like maybe it allows China to ease capital control because China can tracking what happened in the economy. They have long-term implications for standards, technical standards and regulation standards, and also once you have a link between the digital economy, digital currency, and with the economy, it's hard to break it. So that's being a kind of past reliance on that. So we see whether and how China may change the landscape of international financial and economic order. It's a fiat currency, and given the size of China, it will be a huge impact for business within or doing business with China. So we'll see how CBDC will be promoted outside China, and whether the network effect will work. And that also involves what are the practice of other countries, including both public, digital currency, fiat currency, but also private currency like global stable coins and so on and so forth. They involve the issue of data, technology, and regulation. So I will end here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Professor Wang. We do have, from what I can see, quite a number of questions. So I'm not going to abuse my power as being the moderator for the session. We are going straight into the Q&A. The first question here is for Professor Shai, asking for your view on the possible solutions to climate change from central bank's perspective. Professor Shai, are you there? Hello?
Yes, can you repeat what is the question?
If you click on the Q&A, but the question is asking your views on the possible solution to climate change from central banking perspective.
Okay, so that's very difficult and challenging question, because first of all, central bank is not the major player here. It's a government. It's a government commitment on net emission, net zero emission by 2050. So government is a major player. They are the one who are supposed to introduce carbon pricing, tighter regulation on emission, detailed plan towards the decarbonization. So central bank is going to have a supporting role to the government. So I think before we discuss about what central bank can do, I think a government have to have a very clear vision. One good example is like European Commission in EU. They are really taking the lead. They are very clear about their commitment, and they are trying to develop this taxonomy, which define environmentally sustainable activity, and they have a various detailed plan about sustainable financial market. And so there's a lot of legal and institutional framework which has been developed over time. So because EU is very clear, so ECB, is sort of in line with EU framework. So the monetary policy strategic review, which was just released yesterday. In a sense that they are trying to support this EU government function within their mandate provided under EU treaty. Now, other government, not clear yet. For example, United States and Japan, they are committed to the net zero emission target by 2050. That is very clear. And they also made a 2030 target. But how to reach that ambitious target, the detailed plans are not clear yet. So, first, I think government have to have a very strong leadership and, very strong, they have to do some, they have to provide some pressures to the corporate sector, to change their business strategy. So that is the first thing. So once that is clear, then central bank can support, and then central bank know which companies more emission intensive, which projects are more green oriented. That will be clear. Once those criteria become clear, then I think central bank, will be in a much better position to support climate change issues.
Thanks. And the next few questions were meant for John, but John has responded on the conversation. But nevertheless, following the two questions that had been answered, I'm wondering whether John has anything to add on this question, because you are asked to add to this question. John, do you have anything more to add?
To this question specifically that was just asked.
Yeah,
the climate
because
change.
the question there is more or less the same.
Yeah,
but also from the business perspective, though.
Yeah, I think that I think there may be approaches that sort of reinforce the ability for CBDCs to be used in a way that is more climate friendly. But that isn't, again, the role of a central bank. It would be sort of the role of maybe the marketplace and other entities really to sort of maybe adapt a more greener approach to how currency is used in transactions and so on. So I think there may be ways to enable that, and there could be a very good approaches that are implemented with regards to climate change friendly sort of transactions enabled by digital currencies. And I think that's sort of where we can potentially go with some of this innovation that's being developed.
Thanks, John. And this question is interesting and not directing to anyone, but I suppose Corinne may find it most relevant, and Professor Wang. The question is, would it be legally permissible to make retail CBDC interest bearing? Corinne?
Yes, that's really a challenging and interesting question. If you look at literature, it is quite often suggested to make it interest bearing. The recent publication after the consultation regarding the digital euro, however, Fabio Panetta, one of the executive members of the ECB, stated that it will not be negative interest bearing. However, he did not exclude that it could be remunerated in some cases. Yeah, that's a topical question. And there are basically two reasons why you can make a CBDC interest bearing. One is to implement monetary policy, and the other is to make your CBDC either attractive or unattractive compared to other money, basically private money. But I think that both reasons, in my view, are not permissible under current law. So these arguments are often brought forward from an economic perspective, where I totally understand. But let me explain. I think that on the one hand, to implement monetary policy by remunerating negatively or positively, CBDC would violate the price stability mandate. The purpose of the price stability mandate is to ensure that you can purchase a given basket of with a given basket of money, a constant quantity of goods thanks to stable prices. And this principle is, of course, violated if prices raise and then the basket of goods shrinks. But the purpose is similarly violated if prices remain the same, but the money basket shrinks because of negative interests. And then you likewise cannot buy a constant basket of goods. And even if there is positive remuneration, which from a micro view would be good for me, for example, on a macro view, this again would be tantamount to deflationary trends. Now, second aspect, to make it more attractive or less attractive with regard to private money, I think that this would conflict with the principle of open market and free competition, because I'm convinced that if the public decides to hold insolvency-proof money, and in fact, CBDC would be insolvency sure, at zero interest, then banks will have to remunerate the bank deposits at a higher, so at a risk adequate rate. And this is nothing else but a sign of competition and a free market. And conversely, as in the past with cash, CBDC on its own has to convince by its design, by its usability and its convenience, and not because holding is remunerated. So I think it would not be the right approach to remunerate it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Corinne. Professor Wang, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's been I guess the question is about the climate changes, right? If I understand correctly, because I lost some of the signal in the middle of that. Professor Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong. So. No,
the initial question that I thought you might want to answer is whether it's permissible for CBDC to have interest. So if you maintain some kind of currency, let's say, and whether you will create interest.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't get the question due to the connection. I think I think that's what depends on it's possible, but also depends on the design of the CBDC. And I think as far as for China's CBDC design, I don't think they have the plan for interest in that regard. But also they have a lot of consideration, including whether it will affect the financial disintermediation. That's a tricky issue. That also explains that how do you design the CBDC, like China trying the two-tier system and trying to address some of the concern of the financial possible disintermediation issues. Yeah, but we'll see. They like to have a different view, and also I think it's evolving, because once they put into practice, I think the central bank may also adjust that according to needs and the market response. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, you were asking for climate change. The next question, in fact, is the question is: will CBDC be able to contribute to the fight against climate change? I'm sure each of you want to add something there. Start from Professor Wang. Just follow.
Yeah. Thank you. I think this is a very important issue, because I think if you look at what happening in the world economy, climate change is something I think will keep it be the theme, for this area for a long time. And also, if you look at the ECB, they also argues that climate change is an issue that the central bank should address. And China, another example, if you look at U.S.-China relations, and climate change is probably one of the major areas which they are like to have more prosperous collaboration. I think that's been for the CBDC perspective. There are possibility of the programmability, of CBDC smart contracts, because you can potentially they can be explored by setting the smart contracts where there can be subsidy, when you're consuming renewable energy, and also so provide funding for environment-friendly industry, and also because the central bank digital currency also provides the tracking of the money or economy. They may be used potentially for tracking the carbon footprint, if you have a big data system to address that. But also that depends on whether the country are willing to do so. Because if you want to use that for international transactions, that means whether the receiving country are happy with that, and whether you're happy to share the data among the different countries. Yeah. So I think there are possibilities there, but also there are roadblocks. So I would like to end here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that I probably will ask Professor Shari to add this, because the question basically asks, will CBDC be able to contribute to the fight against climate change? I think the background to that question probably was about the consumption of energy in creating cryptocurrency. That's what I thought it might be. Do you like to add?
Okay. So about this, if we look at the private sector's cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, they are consuming lots of energy, so which is not very good from environment perspective. But I think there are some other private sector cryptocurrency which do not use a lot of energy, right, by their design. So I mean, if central bank is going to issue central bank digital currency, of course they have to think about this energy consumption aspect. But having said that, about going back to this issue, Dr. Wang mentioned, at this moment in this environment, this climate and monetary policy circle, we haven't really discussed about this, connecting the CBDC and climate change. It's still, I think, in a central banking circle, it's still two separate issues because it's quite both challenging. Yeah. So in terms of monetary policy at this moment, the issue is how to green the central bank's financial asset, right, which have been accumulating under QE. For example, Fed, their balance sheet is already $7 trillion US. It's huge, right? And then probably many are not really may not be so environmentally friendly. So how to green those assets is quite challenging. And if I may say, because central banks are supposed to be sort of neutral, right? They are not supposed to express preference to this company or that company, but then this climate issue is forcing them to rethink about portfolio, right? How to green portfolio. So I didn't explain in my presentation, but let me explain briefly. When we talk about central bank's financial asset, it can be divided into two types. One is that this monetary policy related asset, and another one is like foreign reserve or employees pension fund. Now this foreign reserve and pension fund, it's a bit easier. Many central bank already applying environment and sustainability criteria to those portfolio. But monetary policy is a bit far more challenging because when they conduct a monetary easing, they do it to support economic growth. Right? It has on that aspect, it has to be neutral. So they are really buying lots of corporate bond, or in the case of Bank of Japan, stocks, right? Not to think about this emission, but in the end, by doing that, they are sort of indirectly supporting the high emission economy. So there is a dilemma there. So that is far more challenging for central banks. So that is an issue we are discussing. Now, so how to apply this CBDC issue? I think not to the currency, but this blockchain technology can be used for sustainability purposes. For example, when some country issue green bond, maybe this blockchain traceability function can be applied, right? But the currency itself is still, I think, it's very difficult for me to discuss.
Thank you. I think this is an important topic. Maybe Corinne and John want to add. Corinne, do you want to add anything? Corinne?
Yes, maybe just I would echo what Sayuri Sishai just said. I totally agree that it should not be implemented on the level of the currency itself. If we would do that, it would also be very patronizing, steering how, for example, currency can be used. So if we think a bit further, what that would mean for any other political topic that would be pursued, that is a dystopic option that I would not like to follow. However, on a data basis, so following the data on a macro basis, looking where is money flowing, as Heng Wang just suggested, I think that is something that can indeed be very helpful to improve further policies, for example. Yes.
John?
Yeah, just a final thought that, about sort of more than what was mentioned before, in terms of encumbering the money, I think is not the way to go. I think it's basically enabling it either through a series of incentives and how digital money may be used in those kind of transactions to sort of further support green initiatives, and disincentivize when they do not, I think, but not on the encumbrance of the money itself. So not putting a sort of a wrapper specifically on the CBDC, but also maybe enabling it through other means. The technology enables a lot of rich levels of smart contracting and other type of sort of data mining and activities around it. And I think this will help, I think, understand sort of how money is spent and where it's going and so on. But I would further strengthen the message of the encumbrance, which I think is not the way to go, but incentivizing and disincentivizing through a series of other of analysis of the transaction as a way to sort of push things more in the green direction than it is today.
Thanks, John. The next question is, will CBDC coexist with private cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Diem? I suppose I ask Professor Wang to start because on the one hand, the Chinese bank is pushing our CBDC. On the other hand, they seem to be doing something towards Bitcoin in China at this moment. So, Professor Wang, do you think they are going to coexist or else?
Yes, thank you, Professor Sun. I think it's been a question probably varies according to jurisdictions. As I mentioned in my talk, I think China is relatively unique in the sense, promoting strongly CBDC, but also indicating that's a kind of concern about private cryptocurrency like the Bitcoins, because that will have challenges for China's capital control and also lead to capital flight. But if we jump out the box, thinking about international scenarios, I mean, they definitely will coexist. I think because they have an issue where they're concerned about CBDCs, about privacy, and the Bitcoins and others have advantage in that regard, and also that's the area where learning from the GFC, where they want a decentralized system vis-a-vis CBDC, which is a centralized system. Yeah. So I would like to close here. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone want to add? No?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I'll add to that. Just to say, I think that initially we sort of felt that CBDCs would sort of take over. I think even given the nature of central bank money, but in many respects, looking at it, I think that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are sort of attractive and used for different reasons. It's not really as a means of payment, but more for speculation and other sort of other sort of economic needs for the people that are buying into them and using them. So I think that, and also Diem and other sort of corporate coins and tokens have a global footprint, whereas the sort of CBDC is more on a national level. So there's a different economic sort of geography around CBDC versus something like a corporate coin like a Diem, for instance, and other type of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. So I think they will coexist because they serve different needs, and I think maybe they will erode into one another and so on. But at the end of the day, I think there will be a coexistence of those.
Thanks, John. I think, John, you might also want to address the next question, considering the kind of work you have been doing. The next question is, how would CBDC affect banks and non-bank businesses? Do you get the question?
It's a very good question. I think that what we see is sort of the role that banks, and I think this also touches many different topics as well. And I think we tried to mention it earlier in some of the Q&A. I think that the benefit for banks is the reduction in cash handling. Right at the end, the cost of cash handling is quite high. There may be some benefits, economic benefits for banks to reduce cash handling costs that they sort of that they have today, but also on a more positive way, rather than a cost reduction perspective, it's opening up new opportunities that they never had before, especially in terms of the geography of money and how it's being used, also the type of transactions that it can complement, and so on. I think that there are certain types of transactions that maybe difficult to do, and maybe the CBDC is the right approach that could help address them. So I think it's for banks to look at this as an opportunity to sort of find new ways to leverage this new innovation in the way that they've done before, but also to apply it in new offerings and new services to complement what is currently being offered by the banks. For non-bank businesses, non-bank financial institutions, I think this creates a great opportunity for them as well to now participate into a wider market with into this market with a new sort of financial instruments that they didn't have access to before. So this could create competition. Fintechs start, and other innovation that could be driven by this, I think will benefit consumers, but also create new opportunities for non-banking financial institutions that could be sort of now offering these kind of services to their clients and so on.
Thanks, John. And anyone of the panel want to add? Anyone want to add anything? No?
Okay, maybe
yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, so about CBDC, many central banks at this moment are not really thinking about applying to make negative interest rate more effective, as some people already discussed. Right? And usually when central bank issues CBDC, at this moment, they put 0 interest. So they don't try to use it for negative interest rate policy, right? So I just want to say one of the reasons is that because unlike academic argument, the central bank cannot get rid of cash. It's not the central bank's position to completely remove the cash. Academic people, they say that, but the central bank cannot do that. There are maybe very small number of people who always want to use cash, and as long as the central bank have to issue it. So if you look at the argument in Riksbank, right? I think almost nobody uses the cash, but Riksbank does not going to get rid of cash. So coexistence of cash and the CBDC, that means as long as cash is there, then rationale of this using CBDC as a one of monetary policy is not as strong as academics hope.
Thank you. The next question is actually specifically directed to Corinne. The question is, you talked about the role of central banks. Do you see major differences between central banks? For instance, is the People's Bank of China different from other central banks? How will this may affect the CBDC design and use? Corinne, this is for you.
Thank you. I'll try to address it. However, I think that this is also something very interesting to be answered by Heng Wang then. So Heng, please correct me if I'm totally wrong, because I'm not a specialist, for example, with regard to Central Bank of China. But looking at the Chinese financial system, I realized that for them it did not make a big difference with regard to private money and state money, because a lot of the most important banks were state banks as well. So in fact, also deposits somehow were closely related to state money, or closer than today. But with the advent of new technologies such as WeChat or Alipay, etc., we saw this shift into a new form of private money, but that is totally subjective observation. There was this new area which somehow maybe incited the central bank to react and to create now a digital form, a more modern form for the public as well. So that could be a motive that did not play such a huge role, for example, with the ECB. So that could be a difference. If we look at European central banks, I think they are rather reluctant. So they are observing. They are making some of them their proofs of concept. They are not really wanting to implement right now, but being actually ready if needs be. And I think this is the right approach. We are not under pressure to move right now, but I think if this digitalization of the society moves on, it's the best thing for the central banks to keep track of the developments as they do, as far as we see. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. This being varies according to the context, and what I would add that, as correctly pointed out, that euro has a different one. Has been a pretty strong role in the international monetary system, where China's yuan is quite different, quite internationalized, and also so that's part of the reason why China want to catch up, and also push for CBDC, and in turn, other countries don't want to lag behind in the digital age. So that's the reason why we see more countries catch up as well. So I would like to end here. Thank you.
Thanks. The next question is actually directed to John and Professor Xiaowai. The question is, there are China's CBDC, possible digital dollar, Japanese yuan, digital euro, or Swedish yuan. What do you see the future landscape and major differences among them? So it's a big question, and it's direct to John and Professor Xiaowai.
John, go ahead.
Okay, so I think, I see that central banks and countries issuing digital currencies in the coming years. So if I look into the crystal ball, and if you look into the future, so obviously this is not a next year kind of thing, but far into the future, I see digital currencies as being sort of here and will be used by the wider marketplace, both in retail and wholesale and commercial applications. I think it's an inevitability. I think it serves this very specific need, and in the sort of in this current age and modernization and digitization of everything, I think we will inevitably see more and more of that rollout. So different countries, different currencies, I see it sort of creating a different landscape from a financial marketplace, where there's perhaps less reliant on central entities that are now sort of running the plumbing of the financial marketplaces that we have today. And a lot more bilateral, regional transactions and sort of taking place because of the digitization of those financial forms of monies, basically. And I think this will transform sort of financial markets. And I see the role also of perhaps the role of reserve currencies as they're used simply because of facilitating global commerce and trade, perhaps playing less of a role simply because there's less of a need for those currencies, because you can now bilaterally trade and transact with parties directly in digital formats. So I think this will be a changing. This will be a sort of the change that will transform the landscape. In terms of differences between them, I think it will be based on sort of the nature of the central banks and the status that they have in the global financial marketplace, but also, I think that it may be more of an egalitarian view, because now you have sort of currencies that can stand on their own without needing to either peg themselves or even sort of use the reputation of the nation, of the central bank, and the utility value of the CBDC as a way to transact with it in many respects. So I think the differences between them will be hopefully from a technological perspective minor, and then completely interoperable and standard and so on, which I think is necessary. But I think that there's also a very strong case for being able to transact between countries bilaterally and regionally as well. So I'll pause there because obviously that's a very broad long-term view of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I look at the central bank discussion, there's a difference between advanced economy and emerging economies. Advanced economy, you know, we have full access to the bank account. Everybody can get it. And already you have a very mature payment system. You know, we have easy access to the credit card. And so financial inclusion is less important issue. And also now on the retail payment, there's a fast payment system. So with the existing system, you know, this speed of settlement is getting faster, and you know, it's getting improving. So therefore, the central banks in the advanced economy, it's less. They don't face urgent need to develop it. However, Sweden is different because Sweden already almost nobody use cash. So central bank feel that they have an obligation to issue central bank digital currency to the general public because of that. Now, ECB is discussing about CBDC also for the same reason. So they might introduce digital euro about 5 years from now. It's because some country in the euro area, they no longer use cash. So therefore, central bank has an obligation to issue CBDC. So that motivation is very different from China and many other emerging economies where people still have limited access to the bank account. And also, in the case of China, Alipay, WeChat Pay is too big, right? Too big, and they became just too big. So maybe the government and the PBOC feel a bit, you know, not very good to have such kind of giant big tech, which hold a lot of private sector data. So maybe that's why PBOC is trying to issue CBDC. But other countries, especially like Japan, we don't have such kind of dominant you know, e-money providers. So therefore, Bank of Japan is thinking about their experimenting CBDC, but there is no urgent need to do that because we have plenty of cash. And there is no urgent need to issue CBDC. Okay.
Thanks. I'm going to ask anyone who has anything to add. Anything to add on this question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I think that I just want to add that whether also the may have the issue about potential currency competition. You know, when the first mover enters into the markets, then you have new standard, new practice, and people may getting used to use that. You know, by tourists, by businesses. You know, and I guess that's probably explains the reason why, if you compare the central bank digital currency, central bank's attitudes this year vis-a-vis 2 or 3 years ago, you see a huge difference. I mean, so that's probably also one of the aspects we like to see, because when more and more central banks catch on that, I think most recent New Zealand central bank also would like to have a consultation paper and so on and so forth on that. You see more countries want to catch up, and Netherlands central bank will say that they want to have a leading role in that regard as well. If you look at Bank of England, you know, so I think besides domestic factors, they also have international factors, you know, and that'll be more tricky. We'll see in the coming decades. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. And that was the last question, and also exactly on the minute that we are supposed to conclude. So may I take this opportunity to thank you all, your 4 wonderful presenters, excellent researcher and expert, and I think we'll benefit talk. And I think I should also thank the audience. And after all, in Australia, this is a later Friday afternoon, and those in Melbourne are freezing cold, and probably in some other places aren't that warm either. And behind every conference organized of this kind, there are all those people who work quietly and not even visibly, and so the administrators that include advice I have in contact Fion Chung, Wen Cheng, Hans Jie, and those associated with the center, and we should also thank them. And thank you everyone, all the participants and people work behind the scene. Thank you very much, and everyone have a very nice, wonderful weekend. Thanks.